Now, if you really obey the Lord your God's voice, by carefully keeping all God's commandments that I am giving you right now, then the Lord your God will set you high above all nations on the earth. All these blessings will come upon you and find you if you obey the Lord your God's voice. You will be blessed in the city and blessed in the field.
Your own fertility, your soil's produce, and your livestock's offspring, the young of both cattle and flocks, will be blessed. Your basket and your kneading bowl will be blessed. You will be blessed when you are out and about, and blessed when you come back.
The Lord will defeat any enemies who attack you. They will come against you from one direction and will run for their lives away from you in 7 different directions.
The Lord will command the blessing to be with you in your barns and on all the work you do, and will bless you on the land the Lord your God is giving you.
The Lord will establish you as God's own, a holy nation, just as God swore to you, if you keep the Lord your God's commandments and walk in God's ways.
All the earth's peoples will see that you are called by the Lord's name, and they will be in awe of you. The Lord will make good things abound for you, whether the fertility of your womb, your livestock's offspring, or your fertile soil's produce, on the very land that the Lord swore to your ancestors to give to you. The Lord will open up for you God's own well-stocked storehouse, the heavens, providing your land with rain at just the right time and blessing all your work.
You will lend to many nations, but you won't have any need to borrow. The Lord will make you the head of things, not the tail. You will be at the top of things, not the bottom, as long as you obey the Lord your God's commandments that I'm commanding you right now by carefully doing them. Don't deviate even a bit from any of these words that I'm commanding you right now by following other gods and serving them.
In the scripture reading according to 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10, and serve each other according to the gift each person has received as good managers of God's diverse gifts. Here ends the reading. A reading from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 12, beginning with the 41st verse. Jesus sat across from the collection box for the temple treasury and observed how the crowd gave their money. Many rich people were throwing in lots of money. One poor widow came forward and put in 2 small copper coins, worth a penny. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I assure you that this poor widow has put in more than everyone who's been putting money in the treasury. All of them are giving out of their spare change. But she, from her hopeless poverty, has given everything she had, even what she needed to live on. This is the word of the Lord.
The Lord's name be praised.
Over the course of the past several weeks, during this Lenten season of self-sacrifice and prayer, we've been talking about John Wesley's Simple Rules for Money, based on a book by Jim Harnish, Earn, Save, Give, We've learned that John Wesley taught his congregation that money was a most excellent gift from God, and that we should always strive to earn all we can, save all we can, give all we can as followers of Jesus. We've also learned that John Wesley set some parameters to govern just how we are to earn and save and give all we can. He said that we should never earn all we can at the expense of our health, our souls, or our neighbor. He said that we should always earn all we can in ways that honor God and fulfill God's highest intentions and purpose for our lives. When Wesley taught his congregation to save all you can, he meant that we should be employing a 10-10-80 strategy, that 10% of our earnings immediately go back to God, which is where they came from in the first place, and that was just the bare minimum for starters. And then he said that we should be saving another 10% of our income for the future. The other 80% was ours to use for abundant living. But of course, he admonished us against hoarding what we had, and used Jesus' story of the rich fool, the farmer who had his eye on bigger barns because he had a bumper crop in his harvest and was going to build bigger barns. Wesley used that as a cautionary tale against stockpiling our resources, our reserves for ourselves. Later that night, God said to the farmer, "Fool, tonight you will die." Last week, we took our cues from Wesley's advice on how to give all you can from Broadway and from a Tennessee Williams play called Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Pastor Galen reminded us of Big Daddy's speech to his son Brick when he says, "Yep, I'm a mighty rich man. Close to $10 million in cash and blue chip stocks, 28,000 acres of the richest land this side of the Valley Nile. But a man can't buy his life with it. He can't buy back his life when his life is finished." Big Daddy did get it right. He had learned the wisdom of the biblical sages who taught those who trust in their wealth will wither, but the righteous will thrive like trees. Zacchaeus was another man who got it right. It took him a while to discover the salvation of God. He had to climb up a tree to encounter Jesus. But when Jesus told him to come down out of that tree because the master was coming to dine with him, a tax collector, well, that changed everything for Zacchaeus. He experienced the extravagant generosity of God. "Zacchaeus, I'm coming to your house." Or rather, "Zacchaeus, I know you don't think that you are worthy, but I'm here to tell you that you are. So let's go eat." Zacchaeus himself began to live in the image of Christ. You see, miracles happen when we are just as extravagant as God, giving ourselves in ways we never thought we could because we long to be like Jesus. Zacchaeus' life was all about earning and saving, but it was only when he discovered the joy of giving that he truly began to live. It's our living that most concerns Jesus, you know. One day he was doing some serious people watching in the temple, And he noticed the way that people were giving their offerings. By the way, I have to confess a brief moment of wickedness this week. As I was working on this sermon, when I began to wonder how much would be put in church offering plates on Sunday mornings if we knew that Jesus was watching us. By the way, he is. Large metal trumpet-shaped containers lined the walls of the temple treasury and the temple courtyard. And since there was no paper money, you can imagine the racket it caused when a large gift was given. It clanged all the way to the bottom of the container. You enjoyed that, didn't you? Jesus watched, and he heard the sizes of the gift. And then he saw a poor widow, a nobody, drop 2 tiny coins into the trumpet. Lepta, they were called, the smallest Greek coins of the day. And those coins didn't make a sound when they hit the bottom of the container. Translators who created the King James Version of the Scriptures figured that the widow's gift was equivalent in 17th century currency to 2 mites. And that's where they get the title of this story, The Widow's Mite. Jesus turned to his disciples, who were still watching the woman, and said an outrageous thing. This poor widow has put in more than everyone else who's been putting money in the treasury. His words were outrageous to his disciples. And they were outrageous to John Wesley's flock in John Wesley's time. And they probably still seem outrageous to us today. 2 little mites, barely making a sound as they hit the piles of money in the bottom of the metal box. Was he crazy? Well, maybe. But listen to what Jim Harnish writes. Clearly, Jesus had a different way of counting the offering that day. He counted it not based on size, but on impact on the giver. Based not on the difference it made in the temple treasury, but on the difference it made in the giver's life. Based not on how much people gave, but how much they had left over afterward. Based not on other offerings, but on the capacity of the giver. I think what Jesus meant was this. Some of the people contributed out of their abundance. They never really felt it, because it never really made a dent in the way that they lived or a dent in their resources. Not so with the widow. She gave out of her poverty. It would have a direct impact on the way she would live the rest of her life. She reordered her whole existence around her faith in God to provide for her. Now, can you imagine that much faith? You see, this story isn't about being rich or poor. And it isn't about judgment either. Although sometimes we preachers get carried away in the pulpit and we make it sound like, oh, rich people bad, poor people good. That is not the gospel of Jesus Christ. And if you have had to bear a lifetime of such preaching, then I am so sorry. Now, on the other hand, please don't misunderstand me this morning. As a people of faith who profess faith in Christ Jesus, there are clearly times when the gospel confronts us on issues of generosity and justice and abundance. Sometimes I think we get confused about that. People think that the pastor is preaching on politics or passing judgment on someone or some group from the pulpit. Social justice is a part of our heritage as United Methodists. John Wesley was very clear about that as well. Preachers are always to be faithful to the gospel. But our Jesus story today is not about judgment. And it's not about rich or poor. It is about faithfulness. When Pastor Paul was on staff at First Church Portland in Oregon, there was a retired pastor and his wife, Earl and Kitty Riddle, who used to say to the congregation during every pledge drive, "Give until it feels good." And Earl and Kitty were tithers to First Church. They had visited Riverside Church in New York City one Sunday, and they had heard the great William Sloane Coffin preach on the story of the widow and the treasury. Only Bill Coffin called the story "The Generous Widow." Coffin said, "She gave more than she could spare. She gave until she felt the hurt. No, she gave until it felt good. How much should we give? The only safe rule is to give more than we can spare. For only then do we finally give ourselves." I think when John Wesley encouraged us to give all we can, he meant give until it feels good. Give until we feel the direct impact on the way we will live the rest of our lives. Give until our giving represents a total reordering of our existence around our faith in God. Paul and I have done that. We have all of our lives been steadily working toward practicing the tithe. And some years we have even given more than our tithe to the church. It hasn't been easy, especially in recent years. We have a daughter in college and several student loans to pay off. And this year, my parents will be coming to live with us. My dad has finally retired, thank God. My dad is 83. And my mom, who is an invalid, is homebound, and they both need our love and support. And Paul and I have always said that when the time came, we would find a way to bring them to be with us. We don't know how it will all turn out, but we are trusting in God to lead us and to give us wisdom in managing our resources. And so this year, we are going to start our tithing to Shepherd of the Hills with my salary. We have no doubt that this will have a direct impact on our lives. But here's the funny thing about giving. It makes us want to do even more for our church. This morning, I'm going to let Jim Harnish have the last word. He writes this: "The urgency behind Wesley's sermon, The Use of Money, was his pastoral desire to lead people into a healthier, more productive, more deeply Christ-centered life by providing wisdom on the relationship between their faith and their finances. Wesley's rules are not about raising money for the church. They are about becoming more like Jesus. Wesley's intention was to guide the early Methodists in the spiritual discipline of generosity so that they would become a people whose lives were shaped in the likeness of an extravagantly generous God." You know, we began this sermon series with Stanley Johnson. Remember him? He was the guy who was in debt up to his eyeballs. Stanley didn't need more money. He needed the wisdom in how to use it. And his quandary leads us back full circle to Solomon's dream that I also described in that very first sermon in this series. Remember when God said to Solomon, "Ask whatever you wish and I will give it to you"? And Solomon could have asked for royal power or for wealth or even the defeat of his enemies. He could have asked for protection for his wives and his concubines. But remember what he asked for? He knew what he needed most, and so he asked for wisdom. And as a result, God gave Solomon all that he requested, and even more: wealth and fame and long life. Maybe that's what Jesus meant when he said, "Desire first and foremost God's kingdom and righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." C.S. Lewis said something similar when he said, "Aim at heaven and you will get earth thrown in. Aim at earth and you will get neither." And the Hebrew sages remind us that when we find wisdom, we find everything we need to live healthy, whole, productive lives. Now, of course, we can read Solomon's story as one event that happened on a particular night in a particular place and a particular time. But for Christians today, the request for wisdom is not a one-time event, especially when it comes to the use of our money. It becomes a life pattern in which, as Jim Harnish puts it, we are constantly searching for divine wisdom. So I'll ask you again today, if you could ask God for anything and be assured that it would be given to you, what would it be? May it be the gift of wisdom, to use what John Wesley called the excellent gift of money in ways that fulfill God's highest and best purpose for us and for the world in which we live. Amen.